Your Eminence, dear holy priests, dear colleagues, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and good evening from the campus of the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. It is truly an honor and a pleasure to be here one more year.
Every moment of life is an encounter.
And continuing a tradition by the Metropolis of Pittsburgh that has so many things to give not only to our local communities, but also to future generations. I want to thank His Eminence, Metropolitan Savas, and the Metropolis of Pittsburgh in general, especially Mrs. Maria Stamoulis, for organizing such important events, presenting significant periods of Greek history, and bringing us closer to the Hellenic vital space, although geographically we're an ocean away. So kudos to you. Tonight, my presentation focuses on a topic that almost everyone has heard something about it, the fall of Constantinople in 1453. This year marks 570 years since the events at the eastern edge of the Balkan Peninsula, marking the end and collapse of the long-lived Byzantine Empire and the rise of a new power in global history, the Ottoman Empire. Almost everyone with Greek inheritance and background has heard at least some story, a rumor, or even a few words about the sack of the city of cities, the Vasilida των Πόλεων, the Poly of the King, Constantinople. It was a unique historical event with tremendous consequences for the entire world, not just for the period, but also for the past and the future worldwide. It marked the passage from medieval times to the Renaissance and pre-modern era, and some scholars, including myself, describe this event as a sacrifice to humanity to move forward from the Dark Ages to modern times with results touching our days. As Greeks, the fall of Constantinople was and is more personal and sentimental since it touches aspects of our shared history, culture, and existence through time and space. I polis ealo, the city has fallen, is one of the darkest phrases and pages in every Greek consciousness, connected directly with the events of that day. Only 4 centuries later, we can talk about a new bright chapter in Hellenic history through the Greek Revolutionary War and the establishment of the modern Greek state as we know it today. However, very few people know the accurate sequence of events during the siege and fall of Constantinople in 1453. That's why we gathered here tonight, to examine and, allow me to say, to relive the last moments of Constantinople under the Byzantine emperors. How did the Ottoman hordes sack the city of cities? What was the situation in the city during the long siege? What happened afterwards? How has the memory remained alive until today? So I want you through this presentation, narrating all these events, close your eyes sometimes, bring yourselves on those walls, on the front lines, and feel the smoke, the gunpowder, and the anxiety of these people, how they sacrificed themselves for what they believed, and how such a huge chapter in history was lost. So here I'm just presenting you one of the oldest, actually, lamentations of Constantinople, as can be found in Paris today. It's in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. It's a lamentation, and I translate a bit for you, and mourning the loss of such a city. Many witnesses from all camps who lived during those events wrote down their memories and became the sources for the famous siege as we know it today. From the Byzantine camp, the scholars George Franzis, Doukas, Michael Kritopoulos, and Laorikos Chalkondylis prepared their own works describing what they have lived and heard. From the Italian side, the Venetian doctor Niccolò Barbaro always had his personal diary with him, through which we know what he experienced. From the Ottoman side, at least 2 sources describe how the attackers experienced the events of 1553. But first, we need to know more about the famous city and see Constantinople as it was during the Middle Ages, one of the most significant urban centers globally. I am confident that many of you have been to modern Istanbul and glimpsed some of its historical, multicultural, imperial, and oriental character. The modern city of Istanbul, located on the ruins of the glorious city of Constantinople, is one of the biggest cities in the world, with a population of almost 16 million people, and the only city stranded on two continents, Europe and Asia. Its modern, undisciplined, and complicated urban planning is a creation of the last, let's say, 60 years, since the city did not change much from its Byzantine form before that. But let's take things from the beginning and see the evolution from its establishment by Emperor Constantine. At the eastern edge of the Balkan Peninsula, on that triangle piece of land, with two sides facing the sea and one the land, Bizan from Megara founded a small settlement under his name, Byzantium, in the 8th century BC. Bizan's small town grew and prospered and became a significant trade hub. The archaeological findings from that period admit its wealth and importance. Under the Roman Empire, Byzantium remained a significant town of the province until Constantine the Great's era, which initiated the city's transformation into the most significant urban center of the medieval world. Due to various factors, especially the rise of the Persian Empire in the east, the Roman Emperor Constantine realized that Rome was too far from the theater of operations and decided to create a new operational base closer to the east. Byzantium was selected due to its physical common characteristics with the Roman capital, Rome. Byzantium was located on 7 hills, like Rome, while its geographical triangle made it easier to fortify and protect from enemies. Byzantium's new name was actually Nova Roma, New Rome, and it took at least 7 years to be prepared. From 323 until 330 AD, an ambitious architectural plan was implemented, erecting many administrative and imperial buildings, copying the existing ones in Rome. The Senate, the Fora, and the Agoras, the imperial palace of Bucoleon, the Hippodrome, cisterns for providing fresh water, granaries, new ports, new workplaces, and so many more were prepared. May 11th, 330 AD, is the inauguration date of the city, and Constantine moved to the new town permanently along with many illustrious Roman families and all the administration services of the empire. In the following years, the city grew exponentially, with many more people moving to the urban center. We have to imagine a city with tall buildings, approximately 4 stories high, made out of concrete, which with many highways and roads for the horses and chariots, accompanied with sidewalks, which were covered, forming galleries for the pedestrians not to get wet during rainstorms. Hospitals, baths, and inns were established all over the place, providing high services to the city's people, while it is believed that at least 400 churches and 100 monasteries were found all over the city. At its peak, Constantinople was the house for at least 1 million people and considered the largest city in the world. To give you an idea, during the sack of the city by the Fourth Crusade in 1204, a topic probably for another lecture, the sources mention a fire that happened in the city's northwest area, burning down a single neighborhood, which, according to the Western sources, the neighborhood size was equal to 7 times the city of Paris. So you can imagine how big was Constantinople compared to other European cities during that time. Of course, in the center was the Church of the Holy Wisdom, ο Ναός της του Θεού Αγίας Σοφίας, which was the largest building in the world for more than 1,000 years. And we need to dedicate probably another lecture about this miracle. For those reasons, Emperor Theodosius was forced at the end of the 4th century AD to remove the current walls of the city and erect stronger and bigger ones even further, so the entire city could be included and protected. Until today, they are called the Theodosian walls, considered a marvel of military architecture, remaining indestructible for at least 1,000 years. For such an important city, a single wall was not considered enough protection. Thus, a complex of fortification was constructed, protecting one side of the triangle from land and the two others from the sea. So you can see here the previous walls of Constantine further down, and then Theodosius is expanding them towards the west. The walls of Constantinople were mentioned in the sources as Theophylacta, God protected, due to their effectiveness in repelling any attack on the city for ages. Especially on the land side of the triangle, the walls consisted of 3 levels, making them impenetrable, covering a distance of approximately 2 miles. The primary defense line was the Megatychus, inner wall, 20 feet thick and 40 feet tall, of solid limestones and crushed bricks. And it was strengthened by 96 towers, 65 feet tall, mainly square, but also a few octagonal, hexagonal, and pentagonal, which were placed every 230 feet to the wall. In front of the Megatychus, of the inner wall, the outer wall, Tomikrotychus, was erected with 62 towers, mainly square-shaped, 45 feet tall, and 30 feet thick. In front of everything, a moat 65 feet wide and 32 feet deep was dug, which could be flooded by the nearby sea channels. A low wall toward the outer wall surmounted it, attempting to climb through the moat even harder. All these 3 levels were connected via bridges over the canal and civilian and military gates throughout the wall. The main gates were St. Romanos, Charisius, Andrianople, and Rhegium gates. However, the most important was the imperial gate, η Χρυσή Πύλη, at the south part of the wall, with golden elephant statues. Today, its ruins are called the Ediculae, and it remains closed. During wartime, the bridges collapsed and the gates were sealed, making an attack on the city almost impossible. So as you have seen, the attacker needed to swim in the moat, be able to climb the first low wall, run the space to the outer wall, manage to climb that, and continue to the area in front of the inner wall, and finally being able to get over the obstacle of the inner wall before entering the city. And all this while the defenders were unleashing everything against them, like arrows, spears, stones, Greek fire, and even more. A small part of the north section of the landslide wall, along with the entire sea walls around the city, and distance of approximately 7 miles, consisted of a single fortification, which is still visible nowadays. So to all these fortifications, we have to add something else. The famous Golden Horn chain to the Golden Horn Bay. As you can see from the map, the north shore of the triangle was opposite the small settlement of Galata, Peran, as it was known, the residence of mostly Genoese Italian merchants, and the sea was forming a narrow bay known as the Golden Horn. To protect that bay, the Byzantines created an iron chain that closed the entrance by being attached to the edge of the Acropolis of Constantinople and the Vienios Tower at the settlement of Galata at the opposite shore. The chain was supported by wooden platforms and barrels, keeping it afloat and obstructing any boat entering the bay. So here you can see an attempt to reconstruct what the Byzantines create there to secure their ports. This is the chain of the Golden Horn. As you can see, Constantinople was the most significant urban center for the Byzantine Empire and the entire world, with fortifications that stopped any enemy who attempt to conquer it via the ages. However, things changed during the last 2 centuries of the empire, the 14th and 15th centuries, which Constantinople reminding a ghost of its former glory. Mainly during the first decades of the 15th century, the Byzantine Empire, which at a certain period ruled the entire Mediterranean world. In the 15th century, it was limited to a small part of Eastern Thrace, the Despotate of Morea in southern Peloponnese, a few islands in the Aegean Sea, and behind the still strong walls of the capital. Constantinople was much smaller as a city during a period with the Byzantine Emperor struggling to keep his imperial legacy alive, since a new greater danger appeared on the horizon. The rise of the Ottoman Empire from the east and the fast expansion of the Turkish authority in Asia Minor and the Balkans constantly threatened the Byzantine Empire's existence, and the only obstacle between the Ottoman Sultan and the conquest of Constantinople was its tall fortifications. All the Ottomans' attempts to siege and attack the city during those decades were crushed on the mighty walls of the city. However, an invention will change everything in the following years, and we will explain this further down. But first, let's visit this last dynasty. The Palaeologan dynasty was the imperial dynasty of emperors who ruled Byzantium and Constantinople until the events of 1453. Their internal conflicts, however, and many civil wars brought the empire to the edge of destruction, and the situation was already irreversible when the last emperor, Constantine XI Palaeologos, rose to the throne. Constantine Dragasis Palaeologos, Dragasis was his middle name from his mother, Helene Dragash, as it was his full name, was the fourth son of the Emperor Manuel II Palaeologos and the Serbian Empress Helena Dragash. He became emperor after the death of his brother John VIII Palaeologos without children in 1448. During that period, Constantine served as a despot in Mistra, defending Peloponnese, when he received the news of his brother's death. He was proclaimed emperor on January 6, 1449, at the church of St. Dimitrios in Mistra, and then with a Venetian ship, since the imperial fleet did not exist anymore due to the poor state of the empire, arrived in Constantinople on March 12, 1449. The priority of the new emperor was to protect and fortify the city from the new eastern threat. Since the empire did not have the means to strengthen its position, Constantine and the Byzantine administration turned towards the western states of Italy and Europe and the Pope in the Vatican, asking for military aid and support. As an exchange, the Byzantines were ready to surrender, unfortunately, their dogma and become Catholics under the Pope's authority. At the same time, the emperor's advisors searched for collaborations with neighboring states through marriage. Since Constantine was still unmarried, and marriage with a powerful princess could raise Byzantium's position and guarantee the city's survival, they even attempt to marry Constantine with the widow of the Turkish Sultan Murat II and stepmother of the young Sultan Mehmed II, the Serbian Sultana Mara Brankovic. With no success, since Mara chose to become a nun under the name Ipomoni. The Byzantium was left helpless, begging for help against the hordes of the Ottoman army, which was approaching from Asia Minor fast. The rising Ottoman Empire appeared as a new strong enemy, not just for the Constantinople, but for the entire Europe. Formed by the merging of the many Seljuk Turkish states of Asia Minor, the Ottomans took advantage of the Byzantine civil wars, in some of which actually they took part in supporting one of the players, and expanded their authority all over the east and continued to the west by capturing a significant part of the Balkans. However, Constantinople's walls were still standing before the powerful enemy. The many sieges by various Ottoman sultans, such as Bayezid on Murat in 1422, failed, although the new young sultan was sure he would manage to conquer the city. His name was Mehmed II, later known as the Conqueror. Mehmed was only 19 years old when he became sultan in 1451, expanding his empire even more. However, his only vision was to conquer Constantinople. According to the sources, he was disguised as a regular soldier and wandering in his capital, Adrianople, Edirne today, during the nights, asking his subjects how he could capture such a great city. In December 1452, he asked his servants to call the Halil Pasha, one of his significant officers, in the middle of the night to come to his quarters. Halil Pasha rushed with a plate full of gold coins as a gift to meet the Sultan. Mehmed put aside the plate with the coins and asked Halil Pasha to give him Constantinople. It was decided that moment, on December 1452, that the Ottoman Empire would attack again and try to capture the Byzantine capital once again in the following months. However, the time will be different. This time will be different because of a new invention, gunpowder. Around the middle of the 14th century, a German monk named Schwarz used gunpowder for the first time in a metal tube, leading to the violent projecting of a sphere, which can be called the first form of a cannon. However, the specific technology was not adopted extensively by the contemporaries, except on a few occasions with no tremendous results. Mehmed, who was well educated in physics and mathematics, decided to use the specific knowledge to manufacture the most enormous and huge cannon the world had ever seen. During the months before 1453, a Hungarian engineer known as Urban arrived in Constantinople before Emperor Constantine, offering his services in constructing cannons. Unfortunately, due to the city's poor state, Constantine could not pay the high salary Urban requested. As a result, the Hungarian left the city and went to the Ottoman capital, Adrianople, and the court of Sultan, offering his services there. The Sultan saw the opportunity and offered him triple the salary he requested and all the material he needed to construct the most enormous cannon the world had ever seen. After a series of experiments, the supersized cannon was ready. It had a length of 24 feet, a diameter of 2.5 feet, and it could shoot granite cannonballs 1,200 pounds heavy at approximately a mile distance. It was called the Basilica, or well known as the Monster of Urban. During its first testing shot in Adrianople, the city's people were warned not to be scared by the loud voice. Nevertheless, when it was shot, the sound wave traveled approximately 7 miles and destroyed a significant number of buildings in the city. The Sultan knew that Urban's monster could destroy Constantinople's walls. In March 1453, the armies of Sultan Mehmed started their movements towards Constantinople. The giant cannon was pulled by 60 couples of oxen, along with 200 slaves, on 3 trunks through newly opened roads from Adrianople to the Byzantine capital. Behind, it was the Sultan himself with the best of his troops. Although most sources measure the Sultan's army to 300 to 400,000 men, a more realistic number should be approximately 150 to 200,000 men. The Ottoman tactical army was approximately 80,000 well-trained soldiers, while the elite forces of the Janissaries were another 20,000. The rest were peasants and trade masses from every part of the Ottoman Empire who joined actually the siege to get something during the city's looting, known as vazibuzuki. Also huge were the numbers of the Ottoman fleet. Specifically, Sultan Mehmed, knowing that a complete siege of Constantinople would require ships, he built and renovated approximately 400 ships of various types. Both the army and navy were planning to attack the Byzantine capital simultaneously. The situation inside the city was already difficult, and the climate among the Byzantines was heavy. Constantine asked several times from the Western states for military aid against the Ottomans, with almost no response. The Venetians promised to help if Pope Nicholas V would pay a previous debt to them. Florence was about to send a single ship as soon as the weather improved. The Kingdom of Aragon and Spain could not send any military help, but it suggested collecting supplies and sending them as quickly as possible. The Kingdom of Hungary was in civil war and unable to help. France, England, and the German states were too far away to send help. The response was the same from the east. The Tsar of Russia and the Kingdom of Georgia had other issues. The Kingdom of Trebizond was also too weak to help, while the Despotate of Mistra in Peloponnese was blocked by the European Ottoman troops of the Turahan Bey to send any help. Even the Knights of Hospitallers of St. John of the island of Rhodes expressed their willingness to help, but only as a part of a bigger coalition. Constantinople was alone. Constantine asked his secretary, George Francis, to count the Byzantine troops, including monks who could carry weapons, and prepare them for the upcoming siege. According to Francis, the number of the Greek defenders was approximately 4,000, and the Western soldiers approximately 2,500. In total, 6,500 against 150 or 200,000 soldiers. So, doing the math, for each Byzantine soldier, there were 20 to 25 Ottoman soldiers. The emperor asks Francis to keep the numbers a secret and continue with the preparation of the siege. The situation in the sea was not much better. Against the vast Ottoman fleet, the Byzantines had only 25 big galleys, including Venetian and Genoese merchant ships that were transformed into battleships. All of them were guarding the chain we mentioned, closing the entrance to the Golden Horn. No significant help arrived except a few additions by March of 1453. 2 Genoese galleys from the Black Sea stopped at the port of Constantinople and decided to stay and fight, as they said, for the glory of God and Christianity. More significant was the arrival of the Genovese knight Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, who immediately swore a fidelity oath to the Byzantine emperor and was ready to die for the salvation of Constantinople. His skills on the battlefield and close connection to Constantine were the reasons for his placement as a protector of the land walls next to the emperor himself. Nevertheless, even with Giustiniani's troops, the numbers did not change significantly. The Easter Sunday of 1453 was on April 1st, the last day of calmness before the storm. On April 2nd, the first Ottoman troops appeared outside the walls of Constantinople and camped a mile away. In the following days, the entire Ottoman army arrived. By April 5th, everyone was at their positions. The sultans, along with the giant cannon and his elites, Janissaries, camped in front of the gate of Romanos, at the section where the Byzantine walls of Laherne were connected to the Triple Theodosian Wall. At that section, opposite the Sultan, Emperor Constantine and Giustiniani stood on the walls, waiting for a miracle. Following the holy law of Islam, Mehmet asked for the possible surrender of the city without any war to receive a negative response. Immediately, the artillery blitz against the walls began. The monster of Orban and smaller cannons were shooting against various parts of the walls to open cracks and fill the moat with debris. Due to the massive amount of gunpowder and overheating, the giant cannon could shoot only 7 times per day. Nevertheless, it was causing significant damage to the wall. However, during the night, women, children, old people, monks and nuns were working tirelessly to empty the moat from debris and rebuild the collapsed walls. This happened every single day for almost 6 weeks, with the walls collapsing during the day and being rebuilt at night. After a week, the small outside wall was already in ruins. The moat in some places was filled, and the defenders constructed a small wooden wall in its place. At midnight on April 18th, the first attack of the main Ottoman army took place, with the Ottomans rushing against the Byzantine positions over the debris that filled the moat. Giustiniani and his soldiers were waiting for them, managing to repel the attack and raise the spirit of the defenders. Approximately 200 Ottomans were killed, and the defenders had actually only 3 injured. At the same time, under the leadership of naval commander Baltoglu, the Ottoman fleet attacked the chain at the Golden Horn and tried to sink the Byzantine and Venetian ships with no success. On the contrary, the Christian fleet did a counterattack and sank some vessels of the Ottoman Navy, forcing them to retreat to their positions. The first defense was successful both on land and sea. 2 days later, on April 20th, an event took place and was considered a miracle by the Byzantines, giving new hope for their salvation. 3 Italian ships, hired by Pope Nicholas V, and an imperial Byzantine ship carrying grain from Sicily under the leadership of the naval master Slandanellas, appeared on the horizon. The city's defenders rushed to the walls to welcome the new reinforcements. However, the Ottomans spotted them too, and Sultan Mehmed ordered his entire fleet to attack the 4 ships as they were entering slowly into the Bosphorus Strait. The Ottoman fleet asked the Christian ships to surrender. They received no response. As a result, the Ottoman boats surrounded the 4 ships, trying to capture them at the beginning and then burned and sink them, with no success. The Christian tall and wide galleys were much superior to the Ottoman boats, which were lower and much smaller. Although the Ottomans tried to burn them by throwing flammable material on their decks, the Christian crews were well trained and put out the fires quickly. At the same time, the Byzantine ship had on board the famous Greek fire, a flammable unknown substance used to burn any approaching Ottoman vessel. Although the Christian fleet managed to repel any attacks and was approaching the chain of the Golden Horn, suddenly the wind stopped, and the Ottoman fleet found the opportunity to come even closer, especially to the Byzantine imperial ship. The other 3 Italian ships, seeing that, approached the Byzantine ship and attached their sides to it, protecting it from any further attacks. The witnesses mentioned that the 4 Christian ships looked like a floating castle with 4 towers in a sea of enemies with smoke and fire. The naval battle occurred the entire day, while the Sultan was watching from the shore, shouting orders and cursing his officers. He was so angry with his maritime commander Baltoglu for being unable to capture just 4 ships that he rushed with his horse into the sea, wanting to participate in the battle. By the afternoon, and when the winds changed, the city defenders opened the chains of the Golden Horn, and the entire Byzantine fleet rushed out with trumpets and drums, giving the impression of a general attack. That allowed the 4 Christian ships to enter behind the chain and find a safe shelter at the port of Constantinople. That was a massive victory for the defendants and a humiliating defeat for the attackers. The Sultan was furious. He ordered the execution of his naval commander, although he changed his mind at the last moment. Baltoglu was whipped, stripped of all his titles and ranks. His wealth and positions were taken away, and he lived the rest of his life in poverty and shame. Meanwhile, the bombarding of the walls never stopped. On April 21st, the Ottoman cannons made significant progress, destroying a giant tower in the northern part of the walls. At the same time, the Sultan brought miners from his European provinces to open tunnels under the Byzantine walls and to infiltrate that way inside the city. A member of Justinian's party was a Scottish engineer known as Johannes Grant. Some of them are telling me that probably he was German, who specialized in mining and underground war. Grant was able to open tunnels under the walls and find the Ottoman galleys and burned and filled them with smoke and fire, burning the Ottoman engineers and soldiers and stopping any attempt to capture the city in that way. The Sultan was desperate. His attacks from the land walls, under the walls, and from the sea all failed. In addition, the arrival of the small Christian fleet gave new strength to the defenders and crushed the morale of his army. He knew that he needed to do something drastic and fast. His latest idea was actually to neutralize the chain of the Golden Horn and the Christian fleet by bringing his naval forces behind them, inside the bay surrounding the defendants, by land. The plan appeared crazy to his contemporaries, but the Sultan had the means and the people to achieve it. And I will explain. He actually opened a new white road behind the walls of the small Genoese city of Galata, of Peran, connecting the bay of the Procyon with the inside bay of the Golden Horn, and paved it with 3 trunks covered with animals' fat. On top of it, of this wooden corridor, the Ottomans placed wooden platforms with iron wheels ready to carry the fleet from one bay to another. In the early hours of April 22nd, the Ottoman ships got attached to the wooden platforms and pulled to the shore by at least 40 oxen and many slaves. With their crew on board, with their sails fully deployed, under the sound of drums and trumpets, the boats began that awkward parade over the hill of Galata and Peran, and by noon, the first ships were launched inside the Golden Horn. At least 70 Ottoman ships appeared inside the bay outside the Constantinopolitan sea walls, causing panic and terror among the Byzantines and Italian soldiers. The emperor immediately called his private council to discuss dealing with this new threat. During that council, the old conflict between the Venetians and the Genoese came up once again, with the Venetians blaming the Genoese for not informing the city defenders about the Sultan's ship movement in front of their walls. The emperor tried to defuse the situation and accepted the suggestion of the Venetian captain Giacomo Cocco to burn the Turkish fleet with small flammable boats during the night. The plan was simple. Giacomo, with a few boats, would approach the 70 Ottoman ships and burn them in the middle of the night. Although everyone agreed, the conflict between the 2 Italian cities postponed the plan for a few days until April 28th. By that day, the news leaked to the enemy camp. On midnight of April 28th, 2 Venetian and 2 Genoese galleys and several smaller flammable vessels left Constantinople's port in secrecy under Giacomo Cocco's leadership, approaching the Ottoman fleet. Sources mention that an intense light on one of the terrace towers of the Galata worried the mission participants, but the Ottoman camp was quiet, encouraged them to continue. As soon as they approached, Giacomo Cocco, full of passion and thirst for glory, rushed in front of his lines towards the Ottoman ships. Suddenly, all the Ottoman cannons responded with a shell fire, aiming at the Christian flotilla. The entire Ottoman fleet was awake and waiting, and at the right moment, they attacked, sinking many of the small vessels. The remaining managed to retreat to the big galleys and return to the port of Constantinople with no success. Although many Italian sailors drowned during the failed mission, including Giacomo Cocco, the ones who managed to swim to the shore were captured by the Ottomans, and the next morning were brought in front of the walls of Constantinople, where they cut their throats so the defenders could see what was expecting them. During the following weeks, the Ottoman forces continued harassing the defensive troops with sudden attacks on the walls by land and sea. However, the Christian soldiers managed to repel the attacks while the civilians were fixing the walls and emptying them all during the night. On May 18th, the Ottomans constructed a tall wooden tower on wheels covered with skins and pushed them towards the gate of Romanos. The previous artillery strikes filled up part of the moat with debris, making a small bridge for the Ottoman moving tower. However, as soon as the tower approached the walls, the Byzantine and Genoese soldiers, under the orders of Giustiniani, struck it with flaming arrows and other flaming material, setting it on fire. The city was saved from one more attack. However, the situation inside Constantinople was becoming unbearable. The food supplies were nowhere to be found. The soldiers' morale was low, and the city's people were desperate and afraid of the future. Small earthquakes and storms were received as bad omens and considered parts of God's punishment for their sins. At the Ottoman camp, however, the situation was no better. The soldiers, after weeks of siege, were exhausted. The high officials were complaining about the Sultan's leadership, and the Sultan was considering breaking the siege and returning to his palace back in Adrianople. However, he decided to make one last attack against Constantinople, hoping that this time will be different. Before that, on May 25th, Mehmed sent envoys to the city asking for one last time the surrender of the Byzantines to him with no terms. In exchange, the emperor will have to pay him an annual tax of 100,000 gold coins, and all the citizens of Constantinople will be allowed to leave the city, taking with them only whatever they could bury and carry. According to the one of the historians, Ducas, one of the witnesses of the events, Emperor Constantine responded, "The city does not belong to me or any other of its people, but we all decided to fight and give our lives for Constantinople." As a result, the decision was followed. On Sunday, May 27th, Sultan Mehmed gave a big speech, a motivational speech to his troops, stating that the last attack will take place 2 days later. And he promised them that if they capture the city, they will be allowed to plunder and take anything they wanted for 3 days. The last preparations took place, and the next day, Monday, May 28th, everything and everyone were quiet, waiting for the big attack. On Monday afternoon, all the churches in the city had services, praying for the salvation of Constantinople, and all the holy relics and icons were carried on the walls to bless and encourage the soldiers. One of the holiest relics was the icon of Virgin Mary Hodigitria, carried by the Hodigon monastery monks at the front lines. Suddenly, during the process, the icon fell from its podium on the ground, and it was impossible to be lifted. The incident was considered as a message from Virgin Mary that something terrible would follow. It was a cloudy and rainy evening. The bells of the great church of Hagia Sophia called the people to the last Vesper, which the emperor and all the city attended, and it is considered the last Christian liturgy in the big church. After the service, Constantine Palaeologos returned to his palace in Blacherne and asked for forgiveness from his compatriots, from his family, his officials, before returning to the walls. His people tried one last time to change his mind and persuade him to leave the city for the west, where he could ask for help and gather troops for the city. It is mentioned that while they were talking to him, Constantine fainted from exhaustion before denying their proposal, stating that, "I am not abandoning my city and my people." Around midnight, he left the palace for the last time with his right-hand secretary, George Francis, to check the defense positions. Everyone went to their places on the walls, and it was mentioned that a bright light could be seen over the dome of the church of Hagia Sophia. The city's people believed that it was the grace of God leaving the city. At 1:30 in the morning of Tuesday, May 29th, the drums and the trumpets sounded from the Ottoman camp. Inside the walls, the bells of all churches and monasteries responded, and all the people gathered back to the churches, praying to be safe. The first wave consisted of the undisciplined and unequipped mass of footed peasants, the Vazivuzuki, who rushed to the walls with screams and cries. Most of them attacked the most vulnerable area, where the Blacherne wall was connected with the tribal war, as we mentioned, and they were stopped quickly by the imperial troops, but they wore out the defenders. That was actually their purpose. The second attack wave consisted of tactical troops from Asia Minor, accompanied by artillery strikes from the big cannons. The tactical Ottoman army was disciplined and eager to conquer the big city. They carried scales and attempted to climb on the inside walls. The defenders were throwing arrows and rocks, injuring and killing many of them. 1 hour before dawn, while the second attack was still happening, a cannonball from the monster of Urban fell in the middle of everything, destroying the main wall and killing many from both camps. The smoke and dust made the atmosphere even more chaotic. The Ottomans managed to get inside the walls from the newly opened crack, but the emperor and his imperial troops pushed them back. However, it was time for the third wave. The third wave was based on the elite forces of the Sultan, the Janissaries, who were well-trained, well-disciplined, and well-equipped. Marching in perfect lines and singing with the Janissaries arrived at the wall and attacked the imperial troops face to face, while the Ottoman Sultan was shouting and encouraged behind them. The Byzantine and Italian soldiers were exhausted after fighting for 4 hours. According to some sources, near the main fight was a small gate, well known as the Gate of Agios Romanos, which was left open, known as Kerkoporta. According to others, however, the Janissaries infiltrated through the cracks of the ruined wall, pushing back the Christian soldiers. However, the final blow took place during dawn. A shot from a firearm hit and wounded the chest of the courageous defender Giovanni Giustiniani. His soldiers were forced to carry him back into the city, causing panic and confusion among the Byzantine and Italian armies. Although the emperor tried to persuade him to return to his post, his wound was significant, and he was transported to his ship at the port of Constantinople. Giustiniani died 3 days later at the Chios island on his way back to Genoa. With Giustiniani's absence and the collapse of the defense lines, Sultan saw the opportunity and ordered a platoon of his Janissaries under the leadership of the giant Hassan, as he was called due to his enormous height, to attack. Hassan and his soldiers managed to climb the walls. Although he was killed, along with some of his soldiers, the remains of his platoon captured the tower of the walls and put their flags and banners on it. A loud voice was sounded all over the defensive lines. "I polis ealo," the city has fallen. Emperor Constantine rushed to push them back and close the little gate of St. Romanos unsuccessfully. Seeing the hordes of enemies flooding the area around the walls and coming inside through the cracks, he dismounted and with 4 companions, according to Francis, raised his sword and attacked the Ottomans. Nobody saw him after that. According to some rumors, during the clash among the sea of Janissaries, the emperor shouted, "Is there any Christian to take my head?" before an enemy sword killed him. He was 49 years old. Some Byzantine and Italian troops still tried to hold the line, but in vain. When they realized the city had fallen, some ran to their ships at the port to escape, while others ran to their houses to protect their families. The gates were opening one after another, and more Ottoman soldiers flooded the city, capturing many of its defenders. The Ottomans were eager for the 3-day looting that the Sultan promised them. Especially the ship crews of the Ottoman fleet, worried that the foot soldiers were going to take everything before them, rushed to the shore of Constantinople and started looting, leaving the Golden Horn and Bosporus unattended and allowing the Christian ships to escape. By Tuesday noon, on May 29th, the city and port were under Ottoman control. Only a few Cretan soldiers were still fighting in some southern towers of the sea, until they were surrendered and allowed to escape to Crete. Sultan Mehmed was waiting for some restoration of order in the city before entering with his Sultan troops and military police. He asked to find and bring him the body of Emperor Constantine. Nobody knew where it was. According to some Ottoman sources, some Janissaries beheaded the emperor and took his head to the Sultan. He gave them actually silk and 5 horses as repayment. Others mentioned that they found his headless body and recognized him from the golden double-headed eagle on his clothes. Although nothing is certain, the Sultan gave what they mentioned the believed to be body of the emperor to some locals to bury it in the area of Vefa, in the northwestern area of the city, where some Constantinopolitan Greek women were lighting up candles to his memory until very recently. As soon as the Ottoman army got inside the city, they started killing anyone they found in front of them. The soldiers in groups started looting churches, monasteries, shops and private houses, and some others moved towards the imperial palace in Blacherne in an attempt to steal any imperial treasures. One of these churches was Saint Theodosia, close to the walls, whose name day was that day, and the church was full of roses. During the city's sack, the Ottoman armies found the roses and were astonished by the church's beauty. The church was transformed into a mosque and until today is called Gül Mosque, the Mosque of the Roses. The blood flooded the streets, reaching the sea, making the entire Golden Horn red, while screams and smoke covered the whole city. It's believed that at least 4,000 Christians were killed during the first few hours. Soon the Ottoman soldiers realized that it was more valuable to keep the Christians alive and sell them as slaves to the bazaars of the Orient. They captured as many people as possible, using their clothes and scarves as ropes to tie them together and take them back to the Ottoman camp. The holy relics from the monasteries were destroyed, including the famous icon of Virgin Mary with Ytria, which was said to have been made by Apostle Lucas. Some Janissaries could be seen wearing patriarchal garments, running through the city and stealing anything they could find. Many monks and nuns from the monasteries were dishonored and enslaved, while others preferred to end their lives by jumping into the wells of their monasteries. Precious and valuable books were torn apart and burnt, while the smartest Ottomans sold some of them very cheap. The unstoppable Ottoman wave reached outside the holy church of Hagia Sophia, where many city people were barricaded inside praying. They broke the main iron gates, and after slaughtering many of the people, they captured the rest and pulled them outside. According to the tradition, during the Ottoman entrance to the church, the priests grabbed the sacred relics and ran to the south wall of the building, where there was a secret gate. After they went through, the gate was petrified. It will remain like this until the building becomes a church once again, and the priests will come back to finish the holy service. On Tuesday, May 29th afternoon, the Sultan entered the city with his bodyguards and ordered the end of the looting. Although he promised a 3-day looting, he realized his big mistake and wanted to save whatever could be saved. He rode to the church of Hagia Sophia and he entered as a new conqueror. There, he found a soldier trying to rip off a marble panel from the wall of the building. According to the sources, he took out his sword and cut his hand by saying, "I allowed the looting for anything you can carry, but the city and buildings belong to me." Immediately, he asked his personal Hoja to get on the pulpit and execute the afternoon Holy Muslim prayer. Mehmed went to the Holy of the Holies of the big church and prayed to Allah for his victory. Then he continued towards the old imperial palace of Bukoleon next to the church, admiring the previous glory of the Byzantine Empire and lamenting the looting he allowed to such a great city. During the following days, the Sultan asked for all the treasures from the city to be brought in front of him, and he claimed his share while the rest was split equally to his army. A slave market was established at the Ottoman camp, and the soldiers sold and exchanged the previous citizens of the city with anyone interested. Old people were sold for almost nothing. Strong men and beautiful women were exchanged for a good amount of money, while the young boys and girls were the most expensive. The Sultan bought and freed many of them, actually. At the same time, he searched and saved many of the previous Byzantine officials, such as the Megas Dukes, Megas Dukas, Lukas Notaras, Gennadios Scholarios, and many more. However, the story of Lukas Notaras did not end so well. On one of the following nights, during a celebration, while the Sultan was drunk, he asked to bring the 14-year-old son of Lukas Notaras in front of him because he heard that he was very handsome and he wanted him for his harem. Notaras declined, and he was brought with his son and son-in-law in front of the Sultan. All three of them were beheaded, with Notaras asking to be killed last so his children will not lose their faith and change their minds after they saw him dead. Similar were the cases of many Italian prisoners whom their new masters executed for almost no reason at all. However, Sultan Mehmed realized that he had made a massive mistake in destroying such a great city, and for that, he pardoned every citizen of the town who fled during the attack, asking them to come back and resume their lives. Constantinople was now in ruins, with smoke and fires all over the place, reminding nothing of its previous glory. By the beginning of June, Mehmed left the city to return to his palace in Adrianople, while he ordered his engineers and builders to reconstruct and made the great city livable. He came a few months later and made Constantinople the new capital of the Ottoman Empire and remained as such until the 20th century. The West's reactions to Constantinople loss were shock and fear. Shock because nobody thought that such a great city with God-protected walls could fall and be taken by the Ottoman armies of the young Sultan Mehmed II. Fear because now there is no one to stop the Ottomans from flooding the Balkans and Europe. And this was proved true a few decades later under the Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, who managed to reach Vienna, the heart of Europe. However, the heaviest toll was the loss of knowledge and culture that was burnt and destroyed during the looting. It is not irrelevant that Pope Nicholas V mourned after he learned the bad news by saying, "The big school of oecumeny has been lost forever." Nevertheless, as the myth of Pandora's box mentions that at least something good came out of that box, that was hope, we can say that the same happened in this case. The sack of Constantinople and the collapse of the Byzantine Empire had as a result many Byzantine scholars to move to the west and the various Italian cities along with their precious Greek manuscripts. There they became the first teachers of Greek, classical literature and authors to the Italian intellectual circles, eventually leading the entire world from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance and the flourishing of letters and arts. The reasons that today we know Aristotle, Plato, Homer, Euripides, and so many others, while words such as democracy, philosophy, and psychology, and many more exist in our vocabulary, is the teaching of these Byzantine refugees in the big Italian urban centers and the transportation of the classical knowledge from the east to the west. In general terms, we can say that indirectly we owe the modern Western world society, culture, and though as we know them today, to the sacrifice of Constantinople and the destruction of Byzantium after more than 10 centuries of life. In conclusion, the fall of Constantinople and the events of 1453 marked world history for centuries to come until today. A lengthy chapter whose beginnings can be traced back to antiquity and continued for over 1,000 years, ended with a loud noise. Until then, the center of the world, the belly button of oecumeny, was located in the east, the center of the empires, the birthplaces of religions, the locations of knowledge. A new chapter began with the world center moving to the west, first through the Italian settlers and the Italian Renaissance, and later to the rest of Europe, resulting in the discovery of the New World and the explorations of mind and soul. And at the center of all was Constantinople. Although it was a ghost of its former glory, the ultimate emperor, Constantine XI Palaeologos, by fighting and dying with his city and people, honored the title of the previous Roman emperors who ruled all the known world. Although he was ruling a tiny piece of land, the significance of that land was so huge and has such a tremendous impact, not just in space, but also in time. Constantinople itself was the cradle of civilizations for ages. It was considered the best example for all humanity, since it was the only host of urbanism, culture, arts, letters, organization, order and law, health and prosperity, and many more. 570 years later, its remains inside and under the modern city of Istanbul are still shining, providing a glimpse of its old glory. If you visit Istanbul today, even if you have never studied Byzantium, even if you are unfamiliar with Constantinople as a Christian city, you will still feel the awe and wonder in front of ruins, walls, and buildings still standing proudly, defying our modern times. Constantinople may have fallen almost 6 centuries ago, but it still exists in various ways in manuscripts, histories, songs, and our daily lives. Let's keep its memory and their memory alive. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.
Can I express my gratitude? I don't know who's running this meeting, but I am the bishop, so I will impose myself. And to thank you again for a very vivid presentation of a very, it's of a great trauma. It's something that it still pains us to hear about. I wonder, I know I appreciate that what we just experienced was recorded, and I want to just affirm that it will be made available. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. I'm recording it, Your Eminence, and I'm going to provide it to you for any uploads and use.
Thank you very much. And perhaps if it wouldn't be too much to ask of you, you could recommend, you could append a list of accessible English accounts that might help us. For those, I'm sure that for many, this will create an appetite for further study. So you might want to include a couple of titles for people.
Of course.
Okay, I'd be very grateful for that.
So,
okay, are there more?
I think before I
Yeah.
think because I see that we are going to have some questions before moving there. I see a question in the chat and I want to answer it before just clearing any misconception. Yes, indeed, the gunpowder was invented in China 1,000 years earlier, correct? But the first implementation as in a canon, especially in Europe, was made by the German monk Schwarz. It was just experiments until the Ottomans actually perfected it and used it against Constantinople for the first time, showing that it's going to have many bad consequences even until today.
So
if I can just say, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Your Eminence. Go ahead.
No, I just want to also point out that among the books that people might want to consider is that a recent work of fiction called Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr, Doerr, which is a collection of stories from different times and places that all come together in a very surprising way. But the central story takes place in Constantinople in 1453. That's kind of the heart of the book, and involves the fate of manuscripts. So it's a kind of an easy way to come into it.
Yes, it's very helpful. Yes, I have it in mind. Your Eminence is so important. I mean, every book describing an aspect of that tragic events shows what actually happened that moment and how this actually affects us today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm finished.
Yeah, we're taking any questions for Dr. Petrou. That was an amazing, extremely enlightening presentation. We can't thank you enough, but I know if you have any other questions, now is the time.
So I have a quick question, Mrs. Tamoulis. This school is from Columbus.
Oh, the guy.
Calais, ¿sí pusiste? Dr. Petrou, I believe you're a Cypriot. Is that what I understand?
Correct.
Μπορεί ωραία. Από πού είστε?
Από Πάφο.
Και εγώ από το Καμακλή στη Λευκοσία.
Χαίρομαι.
Και εγώ. Είχατε μιλήσει, I'm sorry, I'll speak in English. You referred to obviously the Christians and the Muslims at the time when you were speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So are we considering this a religious war, or do you think it was more of an Ottoman and Byzantine, I guess, war? Is it fair to say that it was a Christian against a Muslim, or no? Or what do you?
Thank you so much for bringing this up, and it's a question that actually is torturing, I should say, the researchers until today, and I think it's both. What I want to say by that, before the siege, there is even civil wars, if I can describe them as civil wars and conflicts, especially between the Christians, and I'm talking about the Catholics and the Greek Orthodox. The Catholics are considering as Greek Orthodox ex-heretics and schismatics, and vice versa. That was actually a negotiation card between these two, let's say, zones. However, during the siege, and especially as we can see from the various sources describing the situation inside the city, nobody saw any distinguish or any difference between Catholics and Orthodox. They were Christians. They are seeing their faith as united against the as I describe it, Muslim enemy. It's not irrelevant that actually some of the sources are consider the Sultan as they don't even consider him as an identity, like an Ottoman Empire. They describe him just by his faith. Αυτός ο μουσουλμάν, οι Ισλαμιστής, όπως περιγράφουν σε πιο, as they describe in the more simple words. But it was both. I want to just emphasize that the Ottoman Empire was not actually still formed as Ottoman Empire as we know it. They were formed after the fall of Constantinople. They took every aspect of the Byzantine administration and they attached it to their administration. So if we are talking about Grand Viziers, or we are talking about their administration in later Istanbul or Constantinople, it was well known. They own it to the Byzantines. So before that, there was like, we are going to do this. We are not sure if it's going to be successful, but in order to be successful and united our armies against these people, we have to unite them through faith. So that was the only, let's say, glue that actually was putting all the Ottoman army together. And during the speech, just to close this, I apologize if I'm talking too much, to the Sultan, when he's giving the motivational speech before the final attack against the walls, he's paraphrasing a prophecy by Prophet Muhammad. So he's using faith as actually the motivational speech towards his army. So yeah, it was both ways. And I totally agree with you. You can see it from both aspects.
Yeah, and it's easier, obviously, maybe you agree or disagree, to do that, to unite folks, with a faith, right? I mean, it's easier to do that to go against someone else. Say, hey, so-and-so is different from us in this way because of his religion, and it's just, and so forth. So thank you for that answer.
Thank you. I see one question here about one image shows the Janissaries holding rifles. If it's historically accurate, yes, it is. Although maybe that picture, maybe it was probably a few decades later, the Janissaries were one of the first actually part of the Ottoman army that received personal rifles. The gunpowder after the successful siege of Constantinople became the hot topic of the war, let's say, preparations around the world. And gunpowder, since the Ottoman Empire was controlling all the routes with the Orient, which actually the most supplies for preparing gunpowder was coming, they are having surpluses and they are making experiments. And yes, rifles, or as they call him, tufek. It was one of their first, let's say, attachments to the Janissaries corps. I will answer one question because I think that Mrs. Stamolis asked me before about and I wanted to share it with you, something maybe was not emphasized during the presentation due time, about the Marble King, that there is this tradition in our Greek history about the Marmaromenos Vasilias, and considering that actually I heard the stories too about them during the fight, that angel came from heavens, took Constantine Palaeologos and made him out of marble, and he's going to be revived when Constantinople is going to be freed again, their terms. The thing is that the sources during that time of the siege are pretty clear that actually Constantine died. And they are doing this on purpose because they want to show that actually it's going to be selfish if the emperor will be saved and his people and city will be lost. So the emperor died with his people, even if they don't know that, they're mentioning it. However, the most close people to him, they say that he was died in the midst of the battle. About the Marble King, another suggestions is that we are not referring to the Constantine XI Palaeologos, but to the John Ducas III Vatatzis, who was the emperor of Nicaea in the 13th century. Later he was one of the good emperors, if we can describe him like that, after the in the attempt of reconstruction of the Byzantine Empire after the Fourth Crusade. That after his death he became saint, and he's known as Saint John the Merciful. And they believe that actually his body was it remains in somewhere in Asia Minor and intact in a marble shape, in a marble let's say consistency, and he's going to be revived in some time.
Are there any other questions?
Good evening, Professor. Thank you so much for the inspiring presentation. Just two observations. Tufek, I could still hear my father as a Greek being in the occupied Italian Rhodos after World War II, using that term because they were taught that term growing up, and you brought back a beautiful memory when I heard that today. The second observation, can you expound more on when you said that the relics were taken to the south gate of Hagia Sophia and to be taken out at some time when Constantinople becomes Christian again? Talk a little bit more about that, please.
Well, thank you so much for bringing this up, and I will answer this question. And there are so many other questions about the entire structure of Hagia Sophia, which is a miracle of architecture, and hopefully in the future we can focus on that. It's one of the many myths that actually is taking place during the siege and the fall of Constantinople, that Hagia Sophia, many miracles happened during that day. One of them, for example, was they're saying, for example, that there is a stamp of a horseshoe on the top of a column, which actually they are referring to that actually Sultan Mehmed get inside with his horse, and his horse stand on the column, and because he didn't want to move forward because he knew that the temple was the church was sacred. Many myths, but about the specific one, according to tradition, during the service when the Ottoman armies are trying to take down the Iron Gate, and which is the Imperial Gate, the main one at the east side, at the west side of the church. The tradition is saying that the priests were in there. They grabbed the Holy Communion along with all the sacred relics on top of the of the Holy of the Holies, and rushed towards the south part of the church. Why south? Because in the south, I'm not sure if you have ever visited Hagia Sophia, but there on the south there is this very interesting marble door. There is a door there which is carved on the wall, which leads to nowhere. And I remember I had some conversations and communications with professors from Dumbarton Oaks and Harvard, which they actually were working on Hagia Sophia. They X-rayed and use specific methods to see behind the door. There is nothing. It's just a thick wall, and then it's the outside of the church. So that marble door that was carved for, nobody knows for what reason was carved. That wall was attached to that myth, and that they want to inspire the people, if it makes sense. So you understand that actually gives a very good idea and shows how we are as Greeks throughout centuries. We are Greeks. We like stories. We like telling something and going from mouth to mouth, it becomes huge and important. And that shows that it was lived from the classical times to Byzantium and even today. And that was, although I referred here in the presentation, is not proved. It's not that priest went through there with the holy relics and the door became marbled and he will come back. But it was a very good hope for the people suffering under the Ottoman occupation. And it's still there, and it's a very interesting, let's say, hypothesis.
I hope the prayer comes true that in our lifetimes we see that gate opened and the relics of Christianity can come alive under the auspices of our All Holiness Patriarch Bartholomew.
Hopefully.
Thank you again.
Please. I just want to add to this, since we're talking about Hagia Sophia, that I think that all of us know now, after transforming into a mosque, is such a tragic event. I will try to talk as a scholar, and it's not a tragic event only from faith and Christianity. Hagia Sophia, it means everything to the world. It was, as was described by historians, the belly button of the world. It's not just a miracle that stands there for ages and centuries, and nothing affects it. And everyone is wondering to understand how this structure has this huge dome for so many centuries, and is being used in a way that it brings sadness to not just Christians, but all over the world, because that was not its purpose. It was built to a different way, and by doing what they are doing right now, they are diminishing its glory. And there is so much glory hiding there. You can imagine how much glory was already there before all these events. I see one question in the chat, and I know that it's late there. I don't want to keep you too much. I think John Vuyas is asking if a fantasy novel about the legend of Marble King, it would be a very good novel, and even a Netflix series. I agree totally. I have to say that the events of 1453, they were used, and they are still being used very, very intensively by the Turkish state. 2 years ago, even the Turkish government paid a huge amount of money to prepare the movie Fatih, which means the conqueror. You can find it in YouTube, and it's very okay. It's from their propaganda, from their aspect of views, which is so twisting the sources, which depicting nothing would actually happen, and it's so bad from CGI. Actually, I have to say. But in any case, I have to say that. All these stories are so fascinating and capturing. They're just not so well known yet. They just need some time, maybe, in order for someone to explain to even Netflix producers. Actually, there is something very interesting there, something very fascinating that should be shared with the world.
Guess. I thank you very much for this absolutely incredible presentation. And I would ask, Father Michael is one of the co-chairs, along with Philip Yamalis, that you answered the question to of the Greek Education Committee. And I would, I think we would be ready to end the presentation. And Father Michael, I'd ask if you could just give us a prayer. And thank you again so very much.
I would like also to thank you, Maria, for inviting Dr. Elias Petrou. Beautiful, unbelievable presentation. As you said, maybe in the future to consider a presentation on, say, Hagia Sophia. It's so much there. Visiting Hagia Sophia and with a 7-story up where the empress was, attending the liturgy. And it's seen in Constantinople. The Muslims would have they built it because of Hagia Sophia, imitating this architectural miracle that really stands there from 537. I think the first one was 530, and then the second it was what we have today. I'd like also to recognize Father George from Atlanta, our former, for me, Protosigilo Chancellor. Welcome to this wonderful meeting, and thank you for all these positive, wonderful comments that you made, Father George. Would you like to close the evening with a few words of prayer?
Father Michael, and thank you, Dr. Petrou, and all the organizers. My respects to Metropolitan Savas. Our Heavenly Father, as we pause to learn the history that so many are unaware of today, help us to be renewed beacons of light, faith, and hope that once again your truth can shine triumphantly from the Golden Horn and from such a strategic place that you created here on earth. As we have suffered and as we have bared the burden of the aftermath, we know that all things are possible when we love and are obedient to you. So we turn our anxiety and fear into your hands, and we thank you for giving us Dr. Petrou and so many other scholars and historians that keep the truth alive. Forgive us our shortcomings, give us renewed hope and vigor, bring peace to our world, bless all the participants, including Father Michael and his family, and we thank you and praise you. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, amen. On a very personal note, my wife, when she became Orthodox, took the name Theodosia, which was after my aunt in Crete, Greece, my father's sister. And I'd never heard the story, Dr. Petrou, of the church there of St. Theodosia and the Church of the Roses. So I've got some homework to do to share with Presbytera, but thank you so much. I know everybody would love to speak, but it's an honor, Father Michael, for you to give me this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. I also love the reference to Hypomone Eleni that became the monarchy, the nun afterwards, and we have a saint, empress. In our church, having 6, I believe, sons and 2 daughters. So Ioannis was what he was the emperor as an oldest, and then Constantinos took over. It's beautiful. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Father Michael.
Thank you, Maria. Wonderful, wonderful job. God bless you all. Thank you. Good night.